Because there are some people who I imagine people would point to and say, oh, they're not true Christians, but they are completely, excuse my language, assholes about their faith. And when somebody calls them out on it, oh, you'll be persecuted in his name, so clearly I must be doing it right because you're persecuting me. No, maybe you're just an ass.
In this video, Cliffe debates atheist Matt Dillahunty, a well-known public speaker, author, and host of the Atheist Experience. Matt brings tough points to the table, challenging Cliffe in a thought-provoking exchange. Let me know in the comments who you think presented the stronger arguments. Let's dive in.
What do you believe in regards to the beginning of the universe?
Well, that's an easy one. I'm going to cheat a little bit and give you 30 seconds on love. I'm not convinced that we choose who to love. I don't know for sure. Not making a declaration, but love seems to be something that happens to me. And then I make choices about what I'm going to do with that. And Cliffe said you can't force love, which should also mean that you can't choose love. You choose what you do with the love that kind of happens to you. I think it kind of happens. But what do I believe about the origins of the universe? I don't know. I tell you what I understand. I'm not a physicist. I'm not a cosmologist. I have friends who are. And they have tried. Lawrence Krauss sat with me for probably an hour in a taxi trying to clear up some misunderstandings that I had. I have a physicist friend in Austin who used to have the office next to Weinberg there, who wrote a textbook that they use there on quantum mechanics. He's very interested in cosmology. He's actually currently reviewing a model that is set to compete with the Big Bang cosmology. Now, what do I believe? I believe that the Big Bang model is the best current explanation that fits the evidence. That's exactly what science does. It attempts to explain what we see. I believe that I can have confidence, not faith, because I have evidence that the scientific community have demonstrated an expertise here, and that the process of hypothesis, testing, modeling, making predictions, submitting it for peer review, and falsification leads most consistently to the best possible results. If you want to know how something in reality works, that's the most reliable method. Nothing has ever disproved science but more science. There's no religious book that has disproved science. There's no religious insight that has ever come from religion that was of any use at all until it had been confirmed by science. Now, am I advocating scientism? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know what the origin of the universe is. I'm not sufficiently conversant in the subjects. But I know what the best current model is, and I know that if it changes, it'll be based on evidence and reason. I don't have a good answer. Or do I? See, sometimes I don't know is the best answer. I don't know is the answer that lets you go out and find the actual explanation, rather than pretending that I have come by the one and only possible explanation, which was coincidentally recorded in the holy book that I happen to believe in, and seems to fit my own preconceptions. I can't think of a better explanation than God done it. Fallacy. Well, you can't prove that God didn't do it, so God did it. Fallacy. Look at the Kalam cosmological argument, which he raised earlier. Everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence. You know why that first premise has that everything that begins to exist? Because the old one just said everything has a cause, and that screwed them over when it came to God. So they modified it and amended it. That's what they do with all these arguments for the existence of God. Now it's everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence. Is that true? It's an inference. Don't know that we've come across anything that began to exist and didn't have a cause, but we might have. All kinds of weirdness in quantum mechanics. There's experiments that have been done with electrons where the direction that they come out after being put through this thing, which I'm not even going to attempt to explain because I'm an idiot when it comes to physics. We know it's 50-50. Absolutely no way to predict which way any individual electron's spin is going to be. It seems to be in effect without a cause. And I have some physicist friends who are actually lobbying that there are many such causeless effects. So I don't know that the first premise is true. After you get past everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence, there is the universe began to exist. Did it? What do you mean by that? Certainly the local representation of the universe that we witness can be traced back to just before the Big Bang event, which has at least been confirmed by observation of cosmic microwave background radiation. But we can't go past the Planck time. And as far as we know, time started with the Big Bang, so before the Big Bang is absurd, which means there couldn't have been a cause before because causality is necessarily temporal. So if there's no time, then there's no time to do anything. So maybe there was an uncaused event. I don't know. All I do know is I don't see any good reason to think there was a God that magicked the universe into existence. I don't understand why it would need to do that. I don't understand the exorbitant fashion in which it did all this. It doesn't make sense. But moreover, there isn't any evidence for it.
The Bible never answers the question, how old is the planet? How old is the universe? So from the Bible, I do not know how old the universe is. That's why I turn to science. And science at this point shows that the universe is about 15 billion years old, 13.7 billion years old. And that's why I accept the universe as being about 13.7 billion years old. The Bible says, in the beginning, God, not in the beginning, hydrogen. Why is that important? That's important because in all of my observation, you never get order and design by chance as a result of an accident. So, if science points to evolution as being the most reasonable, the best supported theory of how we came about, I have no problem with that. What I do have a problem with is the philosophy of evolution as an origin, which states behind this amazing order and design, there's no intelligent mind, there's just chance and fate. I'm sorry. Every example of order and design, separate from nature, because we're obviously debating the issue of nature, but every example of order and design that I see demands a designer. A shirt demands a tailor. If I prepare a delicious meal, set it before you and say, there's no cook. This just happened. That's absurd. If you and I are walking through the Black Hills of South Dakota, we come around a corner and all of a sudden, wow, we look up and there are the heads of 4 presidents on that Mount Rushmore. And if I say to you, wow, isn't it amazing the way the glass just sort of trickled over the rock? Wow, there's George Washington. There's Thomas Jefferson. And there's old Rough Rider Teddy Roosevelt. Isn't it amazing the way that the water just carved out those heads on Mount Rushmore? That's unreasonable. Why? Because the order and the design of those 4 presidents' heads on Mount Rushmore demands a sculptor, demands someone who has forethought, intention, and understands how to bring order out of chaos. So if that's true of everything that I observe in life, then when it comes to the issue that we're debating, which is the universe, nature, the human eye, the central nervous system, it is far more reasonable, it is far more plausible for me to believe that behind the order and the design of the universe is an intelligent mind than it is for me to believe that it's all just chance and fate. And that is one of the main reasons, to tell you the truth, that I overcome my doubts when I doubt God's existence. Because order and design, repeatedly, 100 times out of 100, points to an intelligent mind. Now, I love speaking at Texas State. I also love speaking at the University of Texas, up in Austin. And there's a wonderful philosophy professor there named Rob Kunz. He's a philosophy professor at UT Austin. And so I invite Rob to come out and communicate his faith to the students. And Dr. Rob Kunz, the philosophy department at UT, stands up and says, one of the reasons that I'm most grateful for my faith in Jesus Christ is I do not have to struggle through epistemological nihilism the way my fellow philosophy professors do here. Epistemological nihilism is basically an understanding that if there is no God, you can't know anything ultimately with certainty. Why? Because what is your mind? Your mind is an accidental collection of atoms. What is your mind? Well, as Charles Darwin wrote to a man named Mr. Graham in a letter, your mind is simply a highly developed monkey's mind. Would you trust the thoughts of a monkey? Darwin asked. See, that's what I say is intellectually consistent. If I believe that my mind has no intelligent mind behind it, but is simply the result of chance and fate, then why do I trust my mind to tell me that it's just the result of chance and fate? I was speaking at Columbia University in New York City, and a bunch of freshmen came out of humanities class, and they said, Cliffe, how do you know that your mind was not put together by a bunch of very intelligent scientists in a vat this morning? I thought that they were playing games with me. They weren't. Their Columbia University professor was encouraging them to think through the logical implications of there not being a God. If there is no God, your mind is simply a chemical accident. Why do you trust the chemical accident? The reason I trust my mind is because I'm convinced it's not an accident. It's a gift from a rational creator.
Why does it seem as if people project their personal preferences onto God or the lack of? And do you both feel that you're doing this? How do you reconcile that?
One of the reasons, and some people don't appreciate it, that I stick so much to evidence in answering the question, why do I believe God exists? Why do I believe that Jesus is the truth? Is because my challenge as a thinking human being, and I think your challenge as a thinking human being, is to be objective. Follow the evidence wherever it leads. And if the way you live your life points to the fact that you hunger for meaning in life, you know the value of love, you long for life after death, you know that there are some objective morals, like the abuse of an innocent child is never good. In other words, morality is not all relative. Partially relative, yes, but all relative? No. There are objective morals which demands an intelligent mind behind the universe. If that's what you experience life as, then follow the evidence. And the evidence points straight to the existence of God. Now, I grew up in New England. I didn't grow up in Texas. And in New England, it's not popular to believe in God. And I went to a New England prep school. And in that New England prep school, there was one other believer in Christ. So I had to think through my faith hard. And there were a lot of questions that I couldn't answer, and there still are a lot of questions I can't answer. But I can promise you, if you study the evidence of your life, if you observe reality around you, the evidence is God exists. And if you look hard at Jesus Christ, the evidence is he spoke the truth. In fact, if you listen to Matt carefully, Matt agrees with Jesus when it comes to ethics, doesn't he? In fact, almost all of my atheist friends agree with Jesus in the majority of ethical issues. In fact, when you study anthropology around the world, every culture, it's like we're all reading off the same sheet music because there's an amazing agreement regarding adultery, regarding stealing, regarding murder. We human beings have been hardwired by God with a conscience, and we understand good. But what is so ironic and so paradoxical is that Matt keeps on referring to, I just decide. Because I've got an intellect, what's right and what's wrong. Well, guess what? The most brilliant nation of the world in the 20th century committed Dachau, Auschwitz, and Buchenwald. It is not enough to have a brilliant mind. The question is, what are you going to do with that mind? Are you going to gas Jews because you think they're a lower level of the evolutionary cycle? Or are you going to stand for justice, for compassion, for the value and dignity of all of human life? And if so, why? You see, friends, the evidence is that God exists. The evidence is Jesus Christ is reliable. And that is why Africans, Asians, people in South America, far more than the West, have put their faith in Jesus Christ. Because the overwhelming evidence is he loves you. He sacrificed his life for you. He wants you to live with him now. He's not violating your conscience. He agrees with your conscience. He calls you to live a life of selflessness. He calls you to live a life rooted in His love, in His grace, in His truth, and then to give your life away in serving others. And that's why you get an education, so that you can serve people more effectively. And an education is good because it's using the rational mind that God gave you to do that which is best. Baptist, okay?
Sure, I'm thrilled to hear
Right.
that atheists are now a majority in New England, because evidently it's not popular to believe in God in New England, although I thought they were still over at least 50% theists in New England. And yeah, it's interesting. The question was about, do people kind of superimpose their own ideas onto God? And yes, in fact, we've done testing, and we know this is the case, because there are different portions of the brain that are about, I think this, and someone else thinks this. And curiously, when asked what God thinks, the part that lights up for I think this is the part that lights up, not the part for someone else thinks this. But unfortunately, as much as I'd like to just be nice to Cliffe, if you imply that Hitler was an atheist who gassed Jews because they're lower on the evolutionary ladder, you have just committed a despicable act, because Hitler professed to be, in public and private, atheist, a Christian, supported by the Catholic Church. The Nazis ran around with Gott mit uns on their belt buckles, which is God with us, and evolution was banned in Germany. The teaching of evolution was banned. You don't get to lay this at the feet of science, and you don't get to claim that a monster, just because he doesn't happen to believe in God the same way you did, was anything at all like an atheist or a secular humanist or anything along those lines. It's just flatly false. Cliffe and I completely agree. Follow the evidence wherever it leads. And yet, curiously, no sooner had he said follow the evidence where it leads, what did he say? And if you find yourself hungering for an afterlife, that's not following the evidence. That's following your desires. If you find evidence for an afterlife, by all means. But if you find yourself hungering for an afterlife, maybe what you're hungering for isn't real. Where's the evidence for it? I followed the evidence where it led. Turned out, my desire to fulfill 1 Peter 3:15 and be the best representative of Christ I could be clearly led me to here. It's all part of God's plan, right? We know that people project their own thoughts onto what they think God thinks. What Cliffe would probably have us believe, this is unfair, I don't want to put words in his mouth. What many theists would have us believe is that they're not doing that. Other people are, they're not. Not the true Christians. They don't do that. How do you know? How do you prove this? Well, by their fruits you'll know them. Okay. Look, Matt even agrees with Jesus. I agree with Jesus when he was right. You want to find out the truth, go to ironchariots.org. I've got an entire verse-by-verse deconstruction of the Sermon on the Mount, because I got tired of even some atheists saying, oh, this is the greatest and most wise thing anybody's ever said. No, it's not. There's some good advice in there. There's some bad advice in there, and there's some horrible advice in there. There's stuff in there that turns people into victims, and it is polluting conversations. Because there are some people who, I imagine people would point to and say, oh, they're not true Christians, but they are completely, excuse my language, about their faith, and when somebody calls them out on it, you'll be persecuted in his name, so clearly I must be doing it right because you're persecuting me. No, maybe you're just a maybe, and maybe you're not. How do we know? Follow the evidence. What's the evidence? Tell us about this. I have yet to find any evidence that's convincing. And these are not trivial claims that somebody was a god, lived, died, rose from the dead, saved the world, drove people out of a temple. I mean, that might be a trivial thing. We need evidence. Follow it. Read, study. I didn't get here by accident, no matter how Cliffe wants to straw man my comments.
Where do you draw your morals from, and how do you live a moral life?
Sure, and this is one where Cliffe and I may actually have another difference in definition. I would guess that if you were going to define morality, it would probably be that which is in accordance with God's nature or in accordance with God. For me, morality is about the well-being of thinking creatures. Sam Harris wrote The Moral Landscape, and while we don't agree on everything, we're pretty much in agreement there with regard to morality. I've given entire talks on not just secular morality, but the superiority of secular morality, and that secular moral systems are the only true moral systems, because religious moral systems are not systems. They are moral pronouncements. They are moral fiat declarations, whereas a secular system has within it the goal of not only getting better, but getting better at getting better. It's about the tools by which the tools that we use in order to determine what's best for us. Now, Sam Harris has compared it to health, and I like the analogy. We don't know everything about health. Our picture of health is constantly changing. It may be in the future that, all right, I'm not the picture of health, but whoever's the biggest picture of health in this room may end up being sickly in the future. That, you may not be the picture of health. But while we don't know everything, that doesn't mean that everything becomes about opinion and all opinions are equal when it comes to health. If it's your opinion that drinking battery acid is, as a general rule, is good for people, you're just wrong. And if it's your opinion with respect to morality that it's just generally good to own other people as slaves, you are just wrong. And it doesn't matter if you point to the Bible, which actually endorses the owning of other human beings as slaves, as your moral authority. I'm baffled by, I was a Christian for 25 plus years, was studying to be a minister. This is one of the sticking points. There's always this claim to a personal relationship, and God is revealed, and God is written on his heart, and all of these other things. And yet you have this book that is the only real thing that anybody can point to in order to have discussions amongst each other. Because Revelation, as Hume taught us, is necessarily first person, and everybody else it's hearsay. And so we take a look at these things, and you've got clear endorsements of actions that we consider to be immoral, pretty much universally. Was the Bible wrong? Was it right and morality changed? Are things moral because God says so? Or does God say so because they're moral? Does God change his mind? Instead, in secular moral systems, you can begin with some very simple and in some cases obvious presuppositions. One of them being that life is generally preferable to death. The people who don't agree with that aren't going to have a whole lot to say when it comes to morality. If you'd rather be dead, go for it. I feel sorry for you that you're going to miss out on all these wonderful things. But life is generally preferable to death. Health is generally preferable to sickness. Pleasure is generally preferable to pain. Those are not absolute truths. They're not true in all situations, and they can come in conflict. But if you begin with things like that, then you weigh the consequences of your actions on yourself and on others to the goal of building a society. We are stuck here on this rock cooperating. Cooperation is beneficial. Cliffe had mentioned something earlier. I wrote it down. I forgot what it was. But that makes for good TV. But this idea that you can just have whatever goal you want. Yeah, but some of them are demonstrably better than others. Better for you, better for us, and yes, those things are going to come in conflict. Does anybody think that it's a good idea to own other human beings? Does anybody think it's a good idea to subjugate women and keep them at a lower tier? There's somebody somewhere does, somebody somewhere used to, and somebody used to do it as a tenet of their religion. And we have built upon those foundations and grown. And I think that the reason that, because there's nothing in the Bible against slavery, and the reason that Christianity and Christians have by and large given up slavery is because they were dragged kicking and screaming into the 20th, well, at least the 19th to early 20th century, by secular progressives around them, the pinnacles of free thought, the pinnacles of the free thought movement, who valued human beings equally. This idea that God loves everybody unconditionally, am I going to heaven? I have a pastor friend in Austin who thinks I am, and there are probably some others who think I am too, once saved, always saved. And there are others who think I'm going straight to hell. I don't see any reason to think I'm going anywhere. Ricky Gervais recently summed it up nicely. Atheists have nothing to die for and everything to live for. And secular moral systems are about making sure that the life we live is as good as it possibly can be.
My point has never been that purpose in life is something that we arbitrarily arrive at, my point has always been the only way there can be real purpose in life is if you were created for a purpose. My point has never been the stick of God intimidates us and threatens us. Therefore, live a life according to God's purpose. My point has simply been, if there is no God, life is ultimately meaningless. Friedrich Nietzsche, Albert Camus, Jean-Paul Sartre, all the great French atheistic existentialists and German nihilists point that out. It's logical. If your birth is an accident, if your death is an accident, the only thing that lies between those two accidents is another accident, your life. Now, you can attach all the meaning you want to it, but ultimately it's an accident. And you don't have real purpose and meaning in life if you're an accident. You're simply an accident. Jesus Christ says no. Jesus Christ says you're not an accident. You're a human being created by God for a purpose. So this has nothing to do with getting threatened by hell. This has nothing to do with getting threatened by God's big stick. It has everything to do with thinking logically, thinking clearly. Acknowledge, life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing if there is no God, because your birth is an accident, your death is an accident, and it follows that the only thing that lies between those two accidents is another accident, your life. This has nothing to do with intimidation. This has nothing to do with hell. This has nothing to do with a big stick. It has to do with logical thinking. Morality. If there is no God, there is no mind prior to the human mind that defines what's right and what's wrong. Do you need a mind to define what's right and what's wrong? Does anybody really think here that this wall understands the difference between right and wrong? Does anybody here really think that this floor can distinguish between right and wrong? No. You need a mind. So if there is no God, there is no mind prior to the human mind, which means who creates right and wrong? Human beings. And guess what? Matt is not right, I'm not wrong. I'm not right, Matt is not wrong if there is no God. It's all relative. You can't live your life that way. You know very well that if someone cuts you off at the knees, you say, you should not have done that. When you use the word should, you're saying, that was wrong. Don't do that again. Morality is objective. The only way morality can be objective is if there is some type of God, some type of mind prior to the human mind that defines right and wrong. What are the options in answer to the question, who defines right and wrong? First option, the powerful define it. King Arthur and his knights, they define what's right and wrong. Second option is culture defines it. Third option, the individual defines it. If one of those three are true, then morality is right and wrong. Morality is relative. And that's why Dr. Martin Luther King, seated in a prison cell in Birmingham, Alabama, writes this letter from a Birmingham prison. And in this letter he writes, to people who have said to him, Dr. King, how can you break the law of the state of Alabama? Shut up, King. The great state of Alabama has declared that segregation is good. And Dr. Martin Luther King, very logically, very rationally, very kindly and lovingly, writes, there is a law above the law of the great state of Alabama. And according to that law, the great state of Alabama is wrong. The only way that law can exist above the law of the great state of Alabama is if there is some type of creator, some type of God, some type of mind who creates and defines a value of justice that is based on the fact that human beings are not accidents, we're created in the image and likeness of God, which means segregation is objectively wrong, not subjectively wrong, because I'm Matt from Austin, Texas, and I think that racism is wrong. It's not because we're a bunch of enlightened white people, educated at some fine university, and we have finally figured out that racism is wrong. No, racism is wrong because every single human being has intrinsic innate value. We're not accidents. We're human beings created in the image of God, and that's why if we degrade each other, that is absolutely, objectively wrong.
Thanks for watching the best of Cliffe Knechtle versus Matt Dillahunty. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Who do you think had the stronger arguments? Let me know what kind of topics or debates you'd like to see next as well. There were some really compelling points made by both Matt and Cliffe. One moment that stood out to me was when Cliffe used the analogy of Mount Rushmore, explaining how its design clearly points to an intelligent sculptor, and how he applied that logic to argue for God as the creator of the universe and life. It's a thought-provoking way to bridge concepts of design and creation. Another standout was when Cliffe addressed the idea of the afterlife, challenging the notion of believing in heaven out of fear of death. He argued that faith in heaven should be based on the evidence for Jesus and his resurrection. That perspective really frames faith as something grounded in truth rather than emotion or fear. What do you think about these points? Do you agree or do you have a different take? Let me know in the comments. All credit goes to Cliffe Knechtle, Matt Dillahunty, and give me an answer for the clips used in this video. If you enjoyed the discussion, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.